Hello survivors and welcome to Survivors Guild, part of the Mutant Fam Horror Consortium, a community of like-minded individuals creating content and building relationships by and for fans of the drive-in. Today we are taking a look at John Carpenter's 1982 reimagining of 1951's The Thing from Another World, simply entitled The Thing. But first, go ahead and set fire to that thumbs up button and place explosives on that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Also, that share button is acting pretty suspicious, so go ahead and click on it and don't let it out of your sight. Now I hope you like heading off to camp with all of your friends only to have the expedition interrupted by the ultimate camp killing machine, because this movie is getting spoiled. The Thing, based on the story Who Goes There, written by John W. Campbell Jr., and written for screen by Bill Lancaster and directed by John Carpenter, starring Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, T.K. Carter, David Clennon, Keith David, Richard Dysart, and Charles Hallahan. The Thing is about an American research post in the Arctic tundra that gets ravaged by a shapeless monster from another planet that can take on the appearance of whatever or whomever it infects. We open up to an indefinite amount of time ago, with a spaceship illegally entering Earth. We cut to Antarctica, winter 1982. Isn't it always winter there? To this here helicopter chasing this here dog. Things are getting pretty serious when they start shooting at the pup, you cruel, heartless bastards. Before we jump over to the United States National Science Institute Station 4, aka Us and Sis 4, where we get introduced to the ping pong champions of the Antarctic, Dr. Blair and Dr. Copper, and the computer chess wizard champion of Antarctica, R.J. McCready.
Checkmate. Checkmate.
Cheating bitch.
Good game, good game. But right at the tail end of R.J. McCready kicking that computer's ass at chess, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter that McCready stepped outside to see what was the matter. Away out the door he flew like a bug and lifted his goggles and drank from his jug. When what appeared to his eyes as they pierced through the fog, it was a Norwegian helicopter trying to blow up this dog. With a little old pilot so lively and dank that explodes himself into our modest meat bank at deposit number 1. But without even batting an eye, this dude, who really hates dogs, continues his calling of killing the canine, say that 5 times fast, inadvertently shooting George in the leg, before getting deposited into our meat bank by Gary at deposit number 2. The group rushes over to put out the fire, so that they don't burn down Antarctica, while Clark comforts the canine. We get introduced to Windows, who is trying to report the incident but can't get a hold of anyone on the radio. And then we get introduced to Knowles when he throws out some theories.
Maybe we had war with Norway.
And the group decides that they should go check on the Norwegian camp, and they recruit McCready to fly them there. And while McCready and Dr. Copper head over to investigate, the dog wanders the halls all suspicious-like, and goes into a room with who I can only assume is Windows or Norris, based on that hair. Meanwhile, McCready and Dr. Copper show up to find the Norwegian base in ruins. Now, I am only going to count the bodies that we actually see here, because earlier in the film they mentioned that there are 8 others here, because the Norwegians had a team of 10. I am going to consider the 2011 prequel film as a standalone, since there are key plot points in that movie that make the ending of this movie less ambiguous, and in my opinion less fun. They find this guy, who must have died checking his wrists and neck for blood, making him deposit number 3 into our meat bank. And then discover a huge block of ice that something came out of, and the remains of this human-thing hybrid, making whoever this was deposit number 4 into our meat bank. They load the remains onto the helicopter and head back to the Us and Sis 4, so that resident biologist Blair can perform an autopsy. Blair opens it up only to find a normal set of internal organs. Later, Clark takes their new dog to the kennel, where it takes over the alpha position and blossoms into a beautiful flower. So it starts spraying the dog with its nectar. Clark returns to the kennel to see if the dogs have taken to their new alpha, but finds that they have not. The group comes to the kennels only to find out what happens when you stop a Pokemon mid-evolution. Aw man, now they'll never get an Arcanine. And ew. The pile of used dog parts squirts its tentacles onto another dog that's hurting for certain, before the men start shooting at it. But then it sprouts some pretty badass arms and starts working out, as in working its way out of the room, by doing some pull-ups, as in pulling itself up out of the room, getting them gains, as in attempting to gain its freedom. Cause this thing is lit, as in lit on fire when Childs hits it with the flamethrower. The next day, Blair uses science to cut into the charred wreckage of their new breed of dog. It's an invader/rescue mix, and Blair explains that the lifeform absorbs its host and then replicates it perfectly.
It's imitation. We got to it before it had time to finish.
And they simply stopped it before it was done. Dr. Copper goes and draws blood from the remaining mutts and quizzes Clark on how long he was hanging out with that dog.
What the hell you looking at me like that for?
I don't know, it's probably nothing.
The group investigates some of the records they got from the Norwegian camp to see what exactly they were up to, and decide to check out an area where the Norwegians were spending a lot of their time. The men fly out and find out that the Norwegians had found and excavated a large UFO that had probably been there for at least 100,000 years.
I'd say the ice it's buried in is 100,000 years old, at least.
And also find where the Norwegians got their cool new life form. Back at the camp, MacReady explains his theory of what happened to the Norwegians when Knowles runs in accusing one of them of throwing their clothing away in the kitchen trash. And a little later, Blair runs a highly detailed computer simulation of how the thing assimilates and replicates the host. The computer then lets Blair know the probability of someone in the crew being infected, and that if the organism reaches a civilized area, the entire world population could be infected in 27,000 hours. Hey, that's not so bad, we've got a little over 3 years. Which, combined with the fact that one of the crew is probably infected, Blair gets a healthy dose of suspicious, so he grabs the only cure for that kind of paranoia, a gun. Meanwhile, Windows and George are loading this mess into a storage area when Fuchs takes MacReady aside to talk to him.
I have to talk to you.
I'm tired of talking, Fuchs. I just want to get up to my shack and get drunk.
Mac, it's important.
It's 40 below outside.
In the thiacal. Please, Mac.
And Windows gets curious.
We ought to just burn these things.
George sends Windows out to get Gary, leaving him alone with the not-quite-dead thing. Outside, in one of the snow vehicles, Fuchs lets MacReady know that there is something wrong with Blair, and that he stole one of Blair's notebooks from the lab. Well, maybe Blair is just mad that you're stealing his stuff. Ever thought about that, Fuchs? No, of course not, because you only ever think about yourself! He then proceeds to read from the notebook, where Blair wrote about what he imagines about the creature before dropping the bomb that the burned-up remains are not quite dead. We cut back over to George and Windows, where George is acting out what Fuchs was just reading, acting George into our meat bank at deposit number 5. Windows takes off and warns Fuchs and MacReady that George is being all gross. And when they arrive, George has already left. They see him running outside, and when they catch up to him, he shows them a song from his native planet. Notice the breath. And they show him fire. MacReady then goes to find some flamethrowers, and Gary confronts him for killing his buddy. But MacReady isn't all that sentimental.
MacReady, I know Bennings. I've known him for 10 years. He's my friend.
We gotta burn the rest of them.
And they head outside to burn the rest of him. And when they're all done with their pyre, the group heads inside when MacReady sees Blair running away from the helicopter. MacReady checks on the helicopter only to find out that the inside has been torn out. MacReady runs inside to find Blair is having a breakdown from his paranoia, destroying everything so that no one can leave or call for help. The group comes up with a plan, and Childs heads to the other side of the room to distract Blair.
I'll kill you!
While the others rush him. All the while, Blair is yelling about how the creature didn't want to infect an animal, it wanted to infect a human, and the group subdues him. They take Blair out to the tool shed to bind him from harming himself or others, and when MacReady goes to leave, Blair lets him know to keep an eye on Clark.
I said watch Clark.
The group realizes that with no working vehicles or radio, they will just have to wait until spring. But MacReady says that that's not an option. They ask the doc if there might be some sort of test that they can do, and he suggests a blood test. That if they took uninfected blood and combined it in a petri dish with their blood, they could find out who is an imitation by whether or not there is a reaction. Fuchs wants Blair's help, but MacReady says he's too far gone, and for Fuchs to just look through the rest of the notebooks. They go to collect the uncontaminated blood from their blood bank, but it turns out someone beat them to it and made one hell of a mess. They start questioning who could have done this, since only Gary had keys, and everyone starts accusing each other of being infected. Windows takes off and breaks through his kin to grab a gun, and Gary aims his gun at Windows while MacReady tries to talk everyone down. Gary, recognizing that he looks the most suspicious, relinquishes his duties and MacReady takes over.
I know I'm human. And if you were all these things, then you'd just attack me right now. So some of you are still human.
MacReady separates Gary, Dr. Copper, and Clark and has Norris shoot them up with morphine, while MacReady records a podcast.
Nobody trusts anybody now. We're all very tired.
MacReady follows up with Fuchs, who he tasked with coming up with another test, and Fuchs has a couple ideas, but also has some concerns about how this creature infects people and suggests that they only eat canned goods, and that they all prepare their own food from now on. MacReady agrees and then leaves, but while Fuchs continues brainstorming, the lights go out, and then Fuchs is jump-scared by a mystery person who he follows outside. Fuchs, practicing the safe flare-holding technique, doesn't find who he was following, but he does find some torn-up clothes that belong Johns to MacReady. That joke doesn't make a ton of sense, since these aren't long johns, but I'm gonna go with it anyway. We cut over to MacReady, who is now looking for Fuchs, and mentions that someone blew a fuse in the lab and the power has been out for over an hour. He splits everyone into groups to search for Fuchs, having Knowles and Windows go with him to check outside, while Childs and Palmer search the building and Norris keeps an eye on their prisoners. MacReady and crew go to check on Blair and, oh neat, he made himself a dream catcher! Oh wait, that's Dark, who lets them know that he feels better and wants to come inside. They decide it's best if he not, and continue their search for Fuchs, and they find him. Unfortunately, he's way overcooked, burning Fuchs into deposit number 6 into our meat bank. The MacReady crew figure that Fuchs fired himself before the thing could get to him. MacReady sends Windows in to warn the others and takes Knowles to his bunk because someone was up there. After the inside group waits for about 45 minutes, they decide it's time to board up the doors and windows since MacReady and Knowles have been out for a suspicious amount of time. But Norris, who is a hurtin' for certain, sees someone outside and they let him in. It turns out that Knowles found the shredded MacReady clothes and decided to cut MacReady's line by his shack and take off back to the facility. The group starts questioning each other in their fear and paranoia just as MacReady gets to the door. Childs is unwilling to let him in, and Windows questions whether they're wrong.
Childs! What if we're wrong about him?
Why then we're wrong?
They hear him break into the supply room and they begin hacking down the door. But MacReady has a backup plan to blow them all to hell.
Anyone messes with me and the whole camp goes.
They try to gang up and take him down, but he overpowers Knowles and Norris, and then Norris underpowers his breathing, cardiac arresting Norris into deposit number 7 into our meat bank. So they take Norris to see the doc, and while they start trying to resuscitate Norris, MacReady quotes the 1951 movie.
So you sweethearts are about to have yourselves a little lynching party, huh?
They break out the defibrillator, but Norris's body is responsive, and his stomach mouth opens up and bites off the doc's arms, which means that Norris was probably the one the doc visited. Well, maybe. But either way, he was gone a while back, and apparently the thing picked a real lemon of a body. Well, when life gives you lemons, have some backup fruit in the room with you. And unfortunately, Dr. Copper's arms were his moneymakers, and he lands into our meat bank at deposit number 8, armless and unemployable. Then Norris, realizing that the jig is up, goes full-on horrifying when MacReady lights it up. Norris's first head disconnects itself and makes its way across the room. The men put out the fire while the Norris head sprouts legs and eyes. It tries to escape while the men are distracted, but Palmer calls it out and MacReady hits it with the fire blast.
You gotta be kidding.
MacReady then gets the group ready for their test, telling Palmer and Windows to tie everyone up, before Clark tries to surprise attack him. But instead, MacReady deposits Clark into our meat bank at deposit number 9. If anyone asks, he attacked first. And he was also a thing. Definitely a thing. MacReady explains the test to them and draws everyone's blood.
We're gonna draw a little bit of everybody's blood. The blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked. It'll try and survive.
Applying a burning hot metal wire to it, figuring that if they are infected, the blood will react. He begins his intense test with Windows' blood, which comes out clean, followed by his own, and then Doc and Clark's, which both are clean.
And Clark was human, huh? Which makes you a murderer, don't it?
Well, you win some, and you murder in self-defense some. The real problem begins when he tests Palmer's blood, which definitely reacts to the hot wire before he reacts to the revelation. So let's go ahead and add Palmer at deposit number 10 before things get messy. But when MacReady's flamethrower malfunctions and Windows freezes up, as it is prone to do, fix your Microsoft, Palmer drops from the ceiling and in a very hilarious way puts Windows into sleep mode at deposit number 11. Before MacReady finally flames him and then explodes him. And then burns up Windows for a good measure. He then wraps up the test with Knowles, Childs, and Gary. That all come out clean. The group leaves Childs at the building, while MacReady, Knowles, and Gary go to give Blair the test. But when they arrive at the shed, Blair is nowhere to be found. They find a tunnel under the shed and find out that Blair has been busy. So I'm going to go ahead and add him right now at deposit number 12 into our meat bank. The group goes back to get some explosives, but now Childs is nowhere to be found. But Knowles is pretty sure he sees Childs running around outside, all suspicious-like, before the power goes out all across the camp, all suspicious-like. MacReady lets them know that without the generator, in 6 hours it will be 100 below inside the building, and that they have to keep the thing from freezing, whether they make it or not. They begin destroying camp room by room, before they head to the generator room and start setting explosives. Knowles goes around setting explosives, note the Molotov cocktails in his pocket, and Gary sets explosives as well before he is surprised by Blair, who gets all up in his face. Oh, like way all up in his face. Facepalming Gary into our meat bank at deposit number 13. Knowles gets distracted by something and is never heard from again, making him deposit number 14 into our meat bank. MacReady goes to investigate, but gets surprised when the floor starts exploding. Before the boss comes out of the floor, incorporating all the cool moves it used earlier in the movie. Moves like split belly thing and dog thing. Before MacReady remembers the stick of dynamite he lit years ago, and parkour rolls and drops a dynamite line. Now usually I edit out language, but this is a special occasion, so enjoy?
Yeah, fuck you too!
And in true movie climax form, the thing explodes, which sets off all the other explosions in the camp. MacReady wanders around looking for a place to freeze to death in peace, and settles for a room with a nice view. But he gets surprised when Childs shows up, claiming that he thought he saw Blair, and he went after him, but got lost in the storm. They decide to wait and see what happens before Matt gives his bottle to Childs to take a drink, and the movie ends. Now, I am familiar with a few of the theories about the end of this movie. It is left ambiguous in the best possible way with an incredibly bleak ending. And I think that the ambiguous ending is one of the things that makes this movie so damn good. Many say that Childs is a thing, and give some pretty solid arguments for it, such as you cannot see his breath when you can clearly see MacReady's, and that maybe MacReady handed him a bottle that had kerosene or some other flammable liquid as a test, especially because he smirks after Childs drinks it. But what if MacReady is a thing and the bottle actually had a cell in it and he gave it to Childs to also infect him? And besides, if you take the prequel as canon, Childs couldn't possibly be infected because of the earring he has. But I don't. I kind of consider that its own standalone movie. Anyway, I am going to go with the most generous possibility, disregarding prequels, games, and comics, and say that neither of them is infected, and both will end up in the meat bank. Because even if either of them is a thing, they're either both gonna end up infected, or one will freeze to death, while the other goes into hibernation, or they both freeze to death. Either way, it's not looking good for you. So now, to find out, What are your chances of suffering survivor's guilt? This is where we take a look at our main characters and the death that surrounds them to determine your chances of surviving this movie. We start off our meat bank deposits with the pilot digging his way into our meat bank at deposit number 1, followed by Lars getting headshot into deposit number 2, followed by the dude who accidentally killed himself checking his wrists and neck for blood at number 3, and that human thing hybrid at deposit number 4. We then get George doing the thing mating call at deposit number 5, followed by Fuchs lighting himself up into our meat bank at deposit number 6. Things really start picking up when we find out that Norris is already dead at number 7, followed by Dr. Copper armless and unemployed at number 8. Clark takes a bullet like a champ at deposit number 9, followed by Palmer who died sometime earlier at number 10. We then get Windows forced shutdown at deposit number 11, and Blair again dying sometime earlier at number 12. Gary facepalms in at number 13, and Knowles walking off screen and on screen into our meat bank at deposit number 14. And finally, wrapping up our meat bank deposits is Childs and McCready at deposits 15 and 16. Are they things? Are they human? Both? Neither? Who knows? But one thing is for sure, in a matter of hours, they'll both be popsicles. Either human flavor or thing flavor. If you hate that I counted them this way, let me know in the comments below of some video in your suggested feed that's not mine. I'm sure that they'll love to hear from you. So that means that out of a total of 16 characters, only none of them survived, giving you a 0.00% chance of surviving this movie. Given those odds, how would you tell Jason to go himself? Let me know in the comments below. And if this is your first time on my channel, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you don't quite get the Jason joke, there is nearly a year's worth of history that has led to this very moment and this very video proving the thing to be the ultimate camp killing machine. Alrighty guys, thanks and don't die.
Hello, internet fans. Do you want to learn about horror movies that you never knew existed? Do you miss the video store but not the late fees? Then join us at 3B Video, where we talk about stuff like this, and this, and this. If you'll excuse me, I've got some videotapes to return. You like Huey Lewis in the news?